So we have an equation here in quadratic form, and there are several examples of these. They probably all do something different, but anyway, you could write that, in terms of let u equal, let's say u, cosine theta, and then you could say, all right, u squared plus 3u minus 1 equals 0. And that's, normally what we do. We do a u substitution because it's in quadratic form and we get something like that. So that's great. The problem is this doesn't factor. So darn. But we do have the quadratic equation, right? All right, so we can use the quadratic equation and say u equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times a. So then we get u equals negative 3 plus or minus, let's see, what do we get? 9 plus 4 is 13 over 2. Okay, so we get this. Now what is u? U is cosine theta. So we're saying, let's see, where can I write this? Cosine theta is equal to negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 13 over 2. So we're going to get an approximation. We're going to get a calculator. The interval is contained to one time around the circle, 0 to 2 pi. Okay. So we can put in inverse cosine of, now you've got to be careful when you put this in your calculator. You're going to put in parenthesis negative 3. You're going to pick one way to go. So I'm going to go with plus square root 13 over 2, and then I'll do it with the minus, okay? And what do we get for that? So we take our calculator. I didn't do this one beforehand. So inverse cosine, and that gives me a parenthesis, but I have to open another parenthesis. Negative 3 plus the square root, which opens another parenthesis, 13, close the square root, close the numerator, and then divide that by 2, close the whole thing off, push equals, and I get an answer. And how many decimal places do I want to go? 1.2, I'll just go 2 decimal places. So approximately 1.26, and this is in radians. Okay. Now you might say, hey, they didn't say anything about radians. When they're telling you that 0 to 2 pi, that means radians, because if they'd had 360 degrees, then you would have gone with degrees. Okay. All right, so great. We get an answer. What does that mean? Where is 1.26? Well, 1.26 is less than 1.57, so it must be over here in the first quadrant, right, where the cosine is positive. Okay, so, 1.26, whatever that is. Okay, so we have this angle right here, and we're saying that's a solution for theta, approximately 1.26. Now, there's going to be another one. Cosine is also positive in the fourth quadrant. So how do we find that? Well, we would take 2 pi, and subtract the 1.26. So I'll do that on my calculator here. I'm going to go 2 pi minus, and then I don't usually round off until the end, so I put second answer, and I get, this is approximately 5.02 is what I'm getting for that. All right, so that would be this angle. So the 5.02 would be from here over to here, somewhere in the fourth quadrant. Okay, so we have 2. But what about this minus sign? Couldn't that be a possibility? So now I'm going to say cosine, inverse cosine of negative 3 minus the square root of 13 over 2, and we'll see what we get there. All right, so let me clear this out. Inverse cosine, and then I have to open another parenthesis, negative 3 minus the square root of 13, close the square root parenthesis, close the numerator off, divide by 2, close it off, and I get a domain error. Domain error. Now, if you played it all with your calculator, you've gotten that before. Domain error. Uh-oh. What does that mean? It means I got a problem here. So I can only have cosine. The domain for cosine is between -1 and 1. If you go back and you, I'm sorry, the domain for inverse cosine is between -1 and 1. So go back and picture the cosine curve. You can only have it going between 1 and -1, okay? Now you can say, yeah, but we transformed them and we had stretch factors and things like that. Yeah, but this is just an inverse cosine. There's nothing else going on here. And so I need that number inside the parentheses to be between -1 and 1. Well, I don't really know what it is. I can figure that out. I mean, I'm a calculator. Oops. I can clear it and just put in parenthesis, I'm just going to put in this part here, the -3 minus the square root of 13. You wouldn't really have to do this. I'm just checking it. And then divide it by 2. And that gets me like, where can I write this? So just this part, the -3 minus the square root of 13 over 2, that's approximately -3.30. That does not fit in the domain. It's too small. So that's why you're getting the message domain error, because you're asking the calculator to take the inverse cosine of something that it's not in the domain. Okay? So now you know a little bit more about your calculating. Okay, so this case isn't going to work. So what does all of this mean? Well, we have two answers, right? We had this answer, whoops, and we had this answer here. So I don't even remember what it was. I think it was theta. So theta is approximately equal to 1.26 and 5.02. We don't have to put the plus or minus 2k because it was just one time around the circle. So let me put a box around it.